Hey, this is Notser, and today we are discussing the Soviet battleships. Completely freely, I want to share all my thoughts on it. The game in the background is myself in the Tier 10 Soviet battlecruiser, Stalingrad. We are on the map Islands of Ice, and this is a division of 3 Stalingrads. So enjoy the implications. It's going to be an entertaining game. Very entertaining. And I wanted to talk about the Soviet battleships in relation to Stalingrad, because I see a lot of traits they share. The armor scheme is almost identical. The Soviet armor scheme is very usable in the game sense. Unfortunately for the French and the British, they have a lot of soft outer layer of armor. And to some extent, this is also true of the Japanese and the Americans. This soft outer layer of armor does two things. It allows high explosive to not shatter, and it also allows armor piercing to penetrate, given the right angle, stick in the ship, and do penetration damage rather than overpin, or no pin. These ships take damage. They take significant damage from everything. But the Stalingrad does not. The Stalingrad effectively has better armor than a lot of battleships. And that's because of the armor scheme. That's what is so enticing about this, and why it's involved in the discussion. This is the prototype for the Soviet battleships. And that might terrify you, that something like the Stalingrad would have any of its traits given over to a line that's coming out soon. But just hear me out. The reason this works so well is because it has its excess armor on the outside of the ship that freely mitigates high explosive, that freely mitigates armor piercing in the game sense. In real life, it was a waste of weight, but in the game, it's actually the best thing possible because of what it does. And the Soviet battleships have that as well. Now, the Stalingrad Citadel is on the outside of the ship, and it is vulnerable, but pretty much everyone knows it's effectively defended. The Stalingrad is one of the most powerful ships in the game by far. And its power is due to its accuracy, its armor, and its utility. It pretty much has the triple threat. It's got radar, which is the best skill in the game. It's got the ability to equip hydroacoustic or defensive AA, which is the second best skill in the game. It's got a heal, which is wonderful. It's got an armor scheme that actually measures up and is usable against the enemy. I mean, that's really exciting. A player can use that, a skillful player can use that to move forward and to mitigate. The Yamato tried to fire on us, but he hit the higher than 32mm area of my ship, and it was just mitigated like it was nothing. That's awesome. So these are all the traits that you can expect on the Soviet battleships. Heavy armor, incredibly accurate guns, and great utility in the form of the scout radar. And, the damage control is unique. It's different. But I really am a fan of this design because it empowers the player to help their team, more so than others. Now, yes, the accuracy is insane on the Stalingrad over range. And honestly, I think that the Soviet battleship's accuracy is a little too insane. Still. That's not going to change the situation where, if they're within 10 kilometers of a target, though, they're still doing the exact same damage. That is not where it is insane. The accuracy is a little insane to me on the battleship front when we're talking about, 15 kilometers or so, 14. It's just a little too cruiser-like even at that range. And it doesn't need to necessarily be that, and honestly, I don't think that's healthy for the game, but I do think it's healthy that we encourage a battleship line with this type of armor scheme. Because this type of armor scheme allows you, the player, to feel empowerment, to feel like your direct play is contributing to the team. And for them to couple that scheme in the Soviet battleship line and to encourage them to move forward and to sort of be the tanks for their team, what more could we ask for in a line? It is giving us something that honestly is not really encouraged. Yeah, to some extent, the German battleships can perform this sort of brawling, moving forward, but secondaries are not in a good place right now. So they lose out a little bit. But the Soviet battleships, they don't have really useful secondaries. They're 100% all in on their guns. And that is why they're so much better. Their guns are delivering. They're consistent. They will have the highest win rate, I guarantee, of any battleship line. And that's probably because they have the most direct impact over whether they succeed or fail in the player's hands. And I love that. I absolutely adore that. And I think for the game itself, it's a healthy design. Do I believe that a battleship should always have the same accuracy as a cruiser at all range, or almost all ranges? No. No, I don't. I don't think that that's healthy for the game. And in fact, I think that's probably the one aspect of the Soviet battleships I would just tweak. I wouldn't necessarily drop the accuracy that they eventually get. I would just try and lower it so they are encouraged a little bit more to get a little bit closer. I mean, the accuracy is so good, it is worth it. It is so worth it. Plus, your armor holds up. So, for me, it's not really a question of, oh, well, this will encourage players. They'll have no hope of getting into range, right? This will just encourage players to stay back and to feel like a German battleship with your 1.7 Sigma, and you're just pumping shells after round into an enemy, hoping that something sticks. We obviously want Soviet battleships to play correctly. And what's playing correctly, Notser? Can't I play it anyway? Well, playing correctly is using all the tools you have available to help your team win. Camping behind an island, not using that armor, is one of those things that is a selfish decision. The Soviet battleships, one aspect that was a real, honestly, a stroke of genius, is the limited charge damage control. This is the one aspect that forces a player to move their progression forward. They can't just wait 10, 15, 20 minutes because that's perfect. That works exactly against how your damage mitigation tool works. If you drag out the game, you're going to lose every single time. It's kind of like how aircraft carriers are really dominant late game. Like, egregiously dominant late game. But they're basically non-existent for the majority of the first half because players are grouped up too tight and there's a ton of AA in the game. But this limited damage control is going to encourage players to move forward to push the tempo of the game. Having that in a battleship is a godsend because this is your tank. If you incentivize your tank to move forward, the rest of the team is going to prosper and follow. Just as every other game, tanks are there to make everyone else look better because they mitigate damage and they also contribute as little or as much damage as they probably can. And maybe that's too much. You know, maybe the fact that their armor is great, their firepower is wonderful, their maneuverability is awesome, maybe that triple threat in a single package is too much for the game. But it is really everything that you want. And I think that's really healthy to encourage in a battleship line. Especially a line that wants to brawl. A line that wants to push the tempo of the game. I think we almost sit here and we allow it to happen. Because we have a super tall citadel that will always be vulnerable as long as the players set themselves up for a crossfire potential. It's on the Soviet battleships to angle appropriately to both, but you just can't angle against both if they're both attacking you. Also, the Soviet battleships don't really have that good of torpedo protection, and their maneuverability is sort of the combined turret traverse, the rudder shift, the armor scheme. All of it works very well, so there's always good armor pointing towards the target. But it doesn't work very well in effectively avoiding completely torpedoes. We'll have to see if aircraft carriers and DDs are as threatening as they could be. They're not as threatening as maybe they should be. Plus, obviously, Soviet battleships, their accuracy. Accuracy works pretty well against all targets. I regularly average 6,000 to 10,000 armor-piercing damage against DDs. If it wasn't for the battleship AP nerf, the Soviet battleships would absolutely be one-shotting DDs. Left and right. After playing the Soviet battleships, without question, the battleship AP change is probably targeted at them. They're just really accurate at close range, but they're always going to be in order to encourage that type of play. And I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. I can't wait for everyone to be able to play Soviet battleships. Now, having said all that, obviously there are some extremes. I think Tier 5? Tier 5 is ridiculous. It is like playing a Tier 6 or a Tier 7 or a Tier 8 at Tier 5. You thought the Julius Caesar was ridiculous? Tier 5 is ridiculous. It's got like 75 millimeters of armor on its entire bow. And it has one of those bows that like sticks up above the guns. You know, it sort of like goes to the sky. 75 millimeters is more than enough to mitigate literally every single gun in the game. So, yes, there are certain aspects of the Soviet battleships that need to be slightly tweaked. You know, these extremes. But as long as we operate with the understanding that the bow and the stern, there will be 32, 25, 19, whatever tier. So there is a vulnerability to high explosive there. The superstructure is also vulnerable. At least we can reliably hit it. So there's at least 2 positions that everyone can reliably hit for fire. We know that fire prevention will probably be taken by every single Soviet battleship. That's fine. And as long as every single Soviet battleship citadel is reliably punishable if they make a clear angling mistake, I think we're good. You know, as long as they can dial the extremes in so it's not ridiculous, and maybe it's turret traverse at certain tiers, maybe it's gun accuracy at other tiers, or maybe it's armor. As long as they make sure that every single Soviet battleship has a vulnerable citadel, has vulnerable sections that can be reliably penetrated with high explosive, and that they don't completely break the game in the sense that they exist as such a higher win rate than all the other battleships, then yeah, I think it's great. Gameplay-wise, it's perfect. It's really got everything I want. It's got armor that I can use, it's got turret traverse that encourages it, and it's got guns that make me want to fire them every single salvo and just laugh and enjoy and feel the power. You know, a lot of times when I'm pulling the trigger on maybe my German battleship guns, I don't really feel the power because they disperse all around the target and not actually hit the target. That doesn't feel very good. That doesn't happen in the Soviet battleships. And I think that single fact alone will be enough to encourage a vast quantity of players to go over there. And maybe that encourages maybe a different commander skill that incorporates some aspects of the improved accuracy at shorter range for battleships, but obviously not as potent as the Soviet battleships. It just is exactly what I hoped for. Battleships have their strength now. Their strength is their armor and close range accuracy. That's great. That's what they needed the entire time. And the Soviet battleships are the first ones that really do it all. We can try and bring the other battleships up so they have a little bit better feeling in the sense that their accuracy is more consistent so players can rely on it more. Obviously, a Stalingrad game, we did great. That armor is really powerful. Every Soviet battleship armor feels very similar. Hopefully they can dial out some of the extremes. The Tier 5 has weirdness. Tier 7 has an interesting armor scheme that's very usable. The Tier 10 with its AA. Overall, though, super excited to see the Soviet battleships. Leave in the comments what you think. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time.